Billions to Trillions to Action, Mobilizing Finance for Development 2016 to 2030. The new framework for financing development with Bertrand Badre.
World Bank, we made a decision with our shareholders, which basically represent the entirety of the world, to eradicate poverty by 2030 and to boost shared prosperity. It means we want a more inclusive growth. We want a reduction of inequality. And I can understand why some people might be skeptical about ability to basically eradicate poverty and boost shared prosperity by 2030. But the truth is that with everything I've described, with everything you're going to see through this MOOC, I think it's ambitious, but it's possible. I think it's like our walking on the moon for the entire population. And I'm very proud to be part of this, and I'm very proud to invite you to join us for this incredible perspective. This is a rare moment in the history of development where everything is finding its way together and when people discuss and forge a common agenda for the coming years. So that's, I think, very important. But in itself, it wouldn't be sufficient. It's not just because you have a succession of great meetings that things change. It's also because we have a new way to approach things and we take stock of what has happened in the past 10, 15 years. What has happened? First of all, the economic map of the world has changed. Many countries have grown fast and have become important countries. I mean, just to mention the BRICS, for instance, this did not exist in 2000. So we have to take into consideration the development that has happened in the last 15 years. Second, it's also important to recognize that we've just been through a massive global financial crisis, which has changed basically the way we finance things. I mean, banks are no longer the banks that we had 10, 15 years ago. We have institutional investors. We know that going forward, we need to create millions of jobs. We estimate at the World Bank Group that we need to create probably 5 million jobs per month in the next 15 years. And this will not come from creating jobs of civil servants. This will be private sector jobs. This will be a growth led by the private sector. So how do we create the conditions for the private sector and the public sector to work hand in hand and finance development? So that's why 2015 is a critical year. I mean, we have all these big events, but also the understanding of what has happened in the last 15 years, and also the fact that people get together. And I'm very optimistic going forward that these things have happened. What we've put together with our colleagues from other multilateral development banks and the IMF is a kind of macro perspective on what is needed to go from billions to trillions. And what do we mean with this billions to trillions? It's very important, the billions. The billions is really the reference to the ODA, public money, 135 billion. It's a lot, and still it's a drop in the bucket. But it's an important amount of money. This is a money which can really help, which can be used in forms of grants, which can be used to leverage things, to provide guarantee, to mitigate risk, etc. So we have to protect this 135 billion. We have to nurture and we have to make it grow. For instance, the growing role of remittances. Every year, you have roughly $400 billion of remittances, so money transferred by migrants from advanced economy to emerging and developing economies. That is 3 times the flow of ODA. The flow of ODA, 135 billion, the flow of remittances, over 400 billion. That is the order of magnitude. But it's also the development of foreign direct investment. These are the billions. But given the ambitions of the Sustainable Development Goals endorsed this year, this is not sufficient. And so we have to go to the trillions. And that's what we've tried to say in our paper, from billions to trillions, is how do you move from this 135 billion to the trillions needed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 2 big pillars. The first one is public resource mobilization. What do we mean with that? It's really mostly about, money raised by the countries themselves, mostly through taxation, but also, I may hide, through the collection of savings. It's public resource mobilization and private resource mobilization, and we have to work on both. But let me focus on the most important one, which is, in terms of volume actually, domestic resource mobilization. The revenues of emerging and developing economies have grown fast over the last 15 years, probably 14-15% per annum. It's a lot, but it's still very little compared to the needs. Many of these countries have tax to GDP ratio which are below 15%, compared to over 20% in most emerging markets and over 30% in most advanced economies. If it's not sometimes for the least developed country, below 10 or even sometimes around 5%. That's not enough, and we believe that we can do significantly more by better managing the system, the collection of tax, the expenses, etc. And that's why we took an initiative with the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, to put together a joint approach that we will propose to this country to help them assess their tax system, discuss the tax collection, review the expenses, etc. That's, I think, very critical. We need to provide support to that because it's difficult. But the benefits are immense. I mean, 1 point of GDP will always dwarf ODA. There are plenty of tools that we are developing. And I think we have to take into consideration what I've just said about what are the key pillars. It's about better leveraging ODA. So we have to make sure that whenever a dollar of ODA is provided by an advanced economy to less advanced economies, this is used as well as possible. And that's where we can help. Make sure that it's targeting the right objective, that it's leveraged appropriately, that it's catalyzing the right fund. That's, I think, critical. And we have many tools that we can use for that. But we also have, as I said, domestic resource mobilization. On the public side, it's really about engaging with government, discussing their tax systems, the tax collection, etc. So it's not so much about innovation. It's really about providing the right advice at the right time in the right country. It's also about combating illicit financial flows, which is a very big deal. We have to make sure that we don't lose unnecessarily significant amount of money. We can be innovative in mobilizing private resources. The role of the private sector is way bigger, and it takes different forms. Local savings, local capital markets, local pension funds. These are tools where we can be innovative, adapt these very useful tools, pension fund, capital markets, etc., to the specificities of a given developing country. Here again, we can do a lot. We are able to provide advisory services to a given country. We've done that in Rwanda, we've done that in Zambia, we've done that in India, etc. We can also be more innovative, taking into account the way the international financial system has changed over the past few years. As I said, banks are now under pressure. I mean, it's no surprise. The new regulatory framework is constraining the growth of banks, so they are not as much as they were in the past willing to go long term, not as much as in the past willing to take risks, and so on and so forth. So we have to kind of take this into consideration and work with the people who got the money today, which are institutional investors, asset manager, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds. These are the people which basically are the new decision maker. And we have to help this transition happen. Most of these people are not equipped to go to emerging and developing economies. They are not very knowledgeable on this. So we can help them find the right products. And that's where we can be innovative. For instance, we've put together with our colleagues from other development banks, the Global Infrastructure Facility. What is the objective of this facility? Is really to put around the table public and private sector, governments, development banks, and more than 30 institutional investors from all over the world to say, okay, we will identify and build a pipeline of projects where the private sector can play a role. That is very new. We work together to get this pipeline out, to get this pipeline really working. We are not in the business of drafting reports. We are in the business of making projects real. That's an important element. Another area where you can be very innovative is by using insurance or capital markets mechanism to address specific risk. Let me take two examples. Natural catastrophe or pandemic risk. In both cases, we have some ideas of how frequent they are. I mean, it's very unfortunate, but there are regular natural catastrophes, whether they are tropical storms, tsunami, earthquake, you name them. So we can model that and see whether we can find an answer which is provided by capital markets tool, catastrophe bond, for instance, or by some type of insurance. We've done this in the Pacific Islands, for instance. We've been working with Mexico, Philippines, and others. This is working. When you move to not natural catastrophe, but you move to pandemic. Natural catastrophe is relatively easier to define. You know why it starts, you know why it's over, and you can have a good, fast understanding of what is the cost. Pandemic is more delicate. You don't really know exactly when it starts. When it's over, it's kind of delicate, and the costs are more difficult to analyze. But still, you probably can model this. You probably can also insure that at the global level. So here again, an institution like the World Bank Group, because it's a bank, can really intermediate between governments and private sector and its own expertise to make sure we build the best price and most customized product to address this type of risk. We are AAA. In today's world, AAA institutions are very rare. That's very unfortunate, but there are not that many AAA institutions. So we have the capacity to take risks. We have the ideas. So it's really financing for development, moving from the billions to trillions, or from trillions to actions. We have the tools to do that. We can combine our money, we can combine our expertise, we can combine our imagination to find new way forward.